The Africa we want is Africa whose development is people-driven, relying on the potential of African people, especially its women and youth, and caring for children. So Agenda 2063 is not a program of the AU, but belongs to the African people.
2016, the year for human rights, with a particular focus on women. That is the theme of the 2016 African Union Summit here in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. Well, this is the time Africa's leadership converges to reflect on the past year and chart the way forward for the future. But 2016 is already proving a rather eventful year. Well, this week, Talk Africa will bring you the highlights of the 2016 African Union Summit. I'm Beatrice Marshall. Welcome to Talk Africa. Now, the vision of the African Union is that of an integrated, prosperous and peaceful Africa, driven by its own citizens and representing a dynamic force on the global arena. Now, the issues on the agenda in this year's summit include the conflicts in South Sudan, Burundi and the Central African Republic, election of a new African Union peace and security body, and the future of the AMISOM force in Somalia. Robert Nagila has the details.
Tuesday morning saw the opening ceremony of the Executive Council of the African Union. It was addressed by Commission Chair Dlamini Zuma and a representative from the United Nations. On Thursday, they discussed Burundi, South Sudan and the Democratic Republic of Congo.
What has come out of it very clear, they have expressed their support for the progress of peace in the Republic of South Sudan, and they are encouraging the rebel leader, the leader of opposition, SPLIO, to come to Juba so that the transitional government of national unity can be formed.
We are fighting aggressively the negative forces in our country. We have neutralized most of the FDLR who were creating problems in the eastern part of the country. We're not through yet with this operation, but we have committed to pursuing it to the total neutralization of this negative force. And we are pleased to announce that we have just agreed to resume cooperation with MONUSCO in carrying out these operations.
Later, the AU Executive Council held elections for 15 new members of the Peace and Security Council. And perhaps the most important meeting coming up later this week that will involve heads of state is that on terrorism. A threat currently faced by East, Central, North and West Africa, and threatens to spill over to other regions. So plenty to discuss ahead of the Leadership Summit, and quite a cause for concern for some of them. Robert Nagila, CCTV, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Now, halfway through the African Union's decade for women, the continent has yet to fully realize the progress needed. The central question remains unchanged. How can the body significantly improve the lives of women in Africa? Well, I sat down with the African Union's Special Envoy for Women, Peace and Security. She tells me what more is needed. Madam Diop, thank you very much for your time. Now, let's start by looking at this year's theme of the African Union 2016. It's on human rights with a particular focus on the rights of women. First, what is the significance of that theme for you and why the focus on women's rights?
But I think, first of all, let's salute the leadership of the African Union Commission because, you know, the chairperson is the first female elected as chairperson of the African Union, Madam Dlamini Zuma. So in the agenda, it becomes very relevant to say Agenda 2063 cannot move without the people. It's centered, people-centered development. So last year we were looking into 2015, you know, the driving force of Africa was the women. We say, how do we empower them in agriculture, in peace and security, in so many areas that we are still lagging behind. So this year we said we need to reinforce the empowerment by talking about rights, the rights of women, the social, the political rights, because at the end of the day, it's the right of the citizen, it's the right of the people to participate and to contribute. So this year we are very glad to launch the year for women's human rights within the human rights context of Africa.
Some Western states often accuse some African states of not taking human rights issues into consideration. What's your reaction to that?
Africa have its own context. I have done a lot in terms of human rights. You might recall the protocol that the African Union through the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, which have their secretariat in Banjul, and which is doing great job in monitoring the human rights of the country and linking it to the Human Rights Council in Geneva. So you can see that long ago we have been putting in place protocols that really protect the right of the citizen, but monitoring as well and seeing what member states are doing. I think when you look at even here, when we meet, the report of the African Commission is the most contested because they are independent body and they talk about the right of the people, the right to speak, the right to be, freedom of expression, freedom of being a right citizen and voting. So they are the one really that are reporting right now on the situation of human rights in each country. Again, we say that women's rights are part and parcel of human rights. So that has been said since Beijing, but also the Vienna Conference and so on and so forth. So you will have also the most progressive declaration, which is a protocol again, which is the Maputo Protocol, which is the protocol on women's rights, where we talk about the law in inheritance law, where we know that before women will not get the land, even as a widow, or even when they are married. When they divorce, they are thrown out of the house. So we have all these customary and traditional practices that now the protocol have been protecting. So we need to say that this year we want women to know better their rights. But I could say that when during the pre-summit this January, we brought women and young people, women from organization, grassroots women. They understand women at the grassroots. Even if they don't call it their rights, what they will tell you, I want to get my land.
In your words, you have previously said that your mandate is to listen to women, like the women of South Sudan, echo their voice and help them to bring their agenda on peace and security. Are you making headway, though, in giving the people, the women, such as those in South Sudan, in the CAR, in the DRC, in having their voices heard on the agenda of women, peace and security?
When I see them getting together like South Sudan, cross-ethnic, cross-religious women come together and say we should be together and form our common agenda. When I see that happening in Central African Republic recently, to say that this is our platform because we are Muslim, but we are Christian, but we are one Central African Republic. When I went to recently on Somali, and the women are doing the same thing. So I said that this is, first of all, our facilitation role. And when those women are demanding to participate and their voice are heard, because you can see that now in some of those countries, you see women are in the government. You go to CAR, even the interim government is led by the women, but the women are asking in their constitution 50%. And we hope that at least 30%, if it's not the 50%. So women are demanding, we are helping them. They are mobilizing, having their common agenda, but also not only that, they are going beyond that. They said that in the sharing of our resources in our country, we need to be part. We need to put right now in the constitution or the law that are coming up or in our parliament that when it comes to land, we have access. So those are concrete things. For example, for the last year, the chairperson launched an initiative with the ADB to have a fund for women, to access fund, because as you know, women don't have the title in order to go and get credit. So there are so many things that, and in post-conflict reconstruction, we are looking how women can benefit from those projects that UN and AU are putting in place.
At the end of the summit, what would you like to see in the proposals adopted here that will make the progress of women and women's rights on the continent more tangible?
You know, when we go to June, to the next summit, it is going to be really debated and discussed in Kigali, where we will having in June the next summit. So what I would see is a report presented by the chairperson on the status of the women, peace and security in the continent. So my office is working on that. We are looking into indicators on women participation, the protection of women's rights and prevention on violence against women in 53 countries, 54 countries of Africa. So what I'm expecting to women of Africa to mobilize to track those indicators and to look into the solution that can be presented to say this is possible, and monitor for the next year the implementation of the Women, Peace and Security Agenda. It's time for action. What the women are saying is we move from solemn declaration, but we want solemn action, but also solemn deliverable. So what we are looking at is that at the end of the year, the solemn deliverable that have been done by our member states.
We're going to take a short break, and when we return, I'll have expert guests to help me chart the way forward for the African Union. Stay with us.
Every day people are dying. We receive reports of human rights violations, arrests.
My view is that if there is a constitution, it should be respected.
Now, to help us chart the way forward for Africa in 2016, I have expert guests with me here at the headquarters of the African Union. The Deputy Chairperson of the African Union Commission, Mr. Erastus Mwencha, thank you very much for joining us. Carlos Lopez, the Executive Secretary for the UN Economic Commission for Africa, welcome to the program. And Ambassador Kwang Wei-ling, Chinese Ambassador to the African Union, thank you very much for joining us here on Talk Africa. Mr. Mwencha, I'll start off with you. First of all, give us your perspective. Looking back at 2015, for Africa, how did Africa fare?
It was a year of mixed results, but on the scorecard we did much better than could have been, because if you look at in terms of economic growth rate, we recorded just under 4%, 3.7 to be precise. But this was against a very challenging backdrop, because this is a year where we witnessed a major decline in the commodities that Africa exports, and given the structure of our economies, which is primarily commodity based, with the decline in commodities, for instance, take the case of petroleum, you saw the price reduced from about 114 to under 40. In fact, as we speak now, it's just hovering around 30. And one can go on. I mean, copper, from 8,000, we are now looking at 3,000. But we had also major challenges beyond the international induced challenges. We had Ebola. And with that Ebola, it struck us in many ways. Our tourism was affected, our investment was affected. And that is also because the international community has not even understood Africa. Ebola was confined in a very small part of the continent, but the whole continent suffered equally. But beyond that performance, perhaps some of the challenges, if I could start with Ebola, look at the region. Mobilized, galvanized, an army of workers and fought gallantly. We overcame the challenge. But we also saw Africa moving forward in the area of peace and security. We made progress in the area of expansion of agriculture, where there was also another major problem. Because of climate change, we saw agriculture shrink a bit because we largely have rain-fed agriculture. But there are some sectors which compensated. We have seen investment, inward investment, and particularly intra-African investment grow. We have also seen a major boost in infrastructure. We have also seen a major boost in education and the rest. So that's why I said it was a mixed bag, but in the end, Africa did much better when you look at globally what happened.
Your take, Dr. Lopez, though, because in the wake of the falling commodity prices for Africa, is that narrative of Africa rising, the economic prospects, are those still intact?
Well, Africa rising narrative has been associated with opportunities for others, not so much opportunities for Africa. It was very much a way of inducing the spirit that we have now higher demand of African commodities, that there is more opportunities for investment because of a growing middle class, and that Africa trade is growing and booming even in some areas. So it was about more opportunities for others. Now, when it comes to Africa itself, Africa rising is not the best narrative. The best narrative is really to say we need structural transformation, because the growth that we have had so far has not yielded the results that we want. It has not created enough jobs. It has not generated enough distribution. The characteristics of our economy have not changed. We continue to have low agricultural productivity. We continue to have a lot of informality in the service sector. We continue to have very low indices of industrial and manufacturing production. And obviously we are also suffering from the fact that our institutions are very weak, not to mention our infrastructure was debilitated for a long time, when we're still struggling to have power, to have roads, to have access to the logistics that will allow for a modern economy. But let's cut the cake in a different way. Because if we say just how fair Africa performance should be assessed in 2015, we may get one specific type of reading. But if we say how did Africa do in comparison with other regions, then we'll have to say Africa did pretty well. You know, in terms of continental average, Africa was the continent that grew the most. In terms of increase in inward investment, Africa was the continent that grew the most in percentage. In terms of characteristics related to the social sector, like for instance reduction of poverty and so on, now we know that Africa has reduced poverty significantly, but of course from a low base. You know, you had so many poor that if you reduce by 10%, you just make a dent, you don't really transform completely. So I agree with the assessment that has just been made by the deputy chairperson that we have to look, you know, in perspective. And if we look into perspective, Africa did rather well.
Right, Africa did rather well. You've been in Africa now at the African Union here for the past 1 year. What's your take on that?
I think that last year, I think that we had two great events in our relationship with Africa, in our relationship with the African Union. First is certainly the FOCA Summit, which was held in Johannesburg not long ago. I think the summit was a complete success. At the summit, our president made a very, very important speech regarding our policy, strategy, and relationship with the Africa. Basically, he outlined 5 pillars as well as 10 cooperation plans. which I believe will serve as the basis of our relationship cooperation with Africa for the next 3 years or even more. A new basis has been found, has been laid. New direction has been formulated. I think that our relationship with whole Africa now has entered a new phase. So I'm very, very confident that in the next 3 or even 5, 10 years, our relationship with the whole Africa will produce a lot of results and benefits, not only to China but also to Africa as well as the whole world.
Mr. Mwencha, the theme of this year's African Union Summit, it has a specific focus on women, but the issue of peace and security, conflict resolution, that's still quite a challenge here for the continent. Assess for us, how exactly is the African Union going about managing the current conflict on the continent? CAR, South Sudan, Burundi, there's still quite a number.
Well, Beatrice, let me allude to what you have said about the theme, and in particular women. Because last year, our theme was on empowerment of women. And it's also partly what Carlos just mentioned about inclusivity. In that process, we have developed now a scorecard that is looking at how Africa is performing in terms of mainstreaming women, but also empowerment. And some of the statistics we're getting are quite, highly informative. And of course, this called for policy response, but also a mechanism to interrogate our society to see how we can change our paradigm. Because there is overwhelming statistics all over the world that in any society where women have been fully integrated, you see that kind of society perform in all the human index much better. And so that is perhaps to illustrate the point that for us to achieve our potential, we need to address this issue in a much more structured and serious way. And you move on to relate it. In fact, the theme does not even leave the women out, because as we pursued the theme for this year, it has also a component of women to look at the challenges that face women in human rights. Now, the specific areas that you mentioned, Central Africa, South Sudan, Burundi, Somalia, Africa is there. And I could give you a long answer for that. But as you know that we have the African Peace and Security Architecture. Part of that architecture, we have the Peace and Security Council, which has remained in the leadership in looking for solutions and interventions on the ground, and those are some of the issues that will be discussed here. As you know that tomorrow there will be a Peace and Security Council, and the issues that you mentioned, the countries that you mentioned, the Peace and Security Council will review and provide a way forward.
Dr. Lopez, though, you have talked about the causes of conflict as being partly due to exclusion, partly being due to inequalities. The priority, first of all, what's been the economic impact of the conflict on the continent? And secondly, what does Africa need to rethink to manage the conflict?
I think we are losing about 2% GDP growth a year because of conflicts, which would have put Africa in the same level of growth as, say, China and India if we didn't have conflicts. This is calculated on the basis of regression analysis, different categories of GDP like agriculture, like trade and so on, and how they are affected by conflict. But I think the basis for the situation that we are living is the fact that we have had major problems managing diversity. And as a result, exclusion, inequality is a manifestation of not managing diversity properly. Groups of people feel excluded for one reason or another, and groups of people also feel privileged and want to preserve that privilege through conflict and war. And we have to finish with that kind of an approach of trying to resolve conflict only at the tail end, meaning, when we enter into mediations and trying to find the best way to safeguard the appearances of democratic establishment, for instance, insisting on elections, and go to the causes. That's basically my message. And if you go to the causes, this is the right moment to do it because we are growing. When you are growing, you can grow in different ways. If we choose to grow in a way that is going to address inequality and exclusion, we are going not just to grow, but to grow solid in terms of avoiding conflict.
Ambassador Kwang, though China's position on Africa's peace and security, what are we going to see from China in 2016, and what is China's position today, though, on Africa's peace and security measures?
I think that peace and security in Africa is essential for the development of Africa. To us, development and peace are two major challenges facing whole Africa. So that's why China now attaches great importance to peace and security and development in Africa. And we have now tried our best to make some contributions. You may remember our President Xi announced last September in New York that China was going to provide $100 million military aid to the African Union for the building of standby force. And so China sees the issue as very important, as a precondition for economic development of the whole Africa. And China, as a big power, must play its due role and assume some responsibilities because more and more African countries have asked China to provide assistance, to make contributions. So we feel that it is our duty to be part of it. And also, for the next 3 to 5 years, there will be more programs, projects between China and Africa. And more Chinese investors will come to the continent to invest and start business. But, we need to have a favorable environment. Investors have to see that it is safe to invest in Africa. So in order to attract and encourage more investors from China to come to Africa, I think we need to address peace and security in Africa very seriously. I think that if the issue can be handled very well, I'm sure that more investment from China will be here. And that, of course, will be very important for the development of Africa.
Dr. Lopez, looking forward for Africa in 2016, your perspective?
Oh, definitely we are going to grow more than last year. All the odds are in our favor. People forget that 2/3 of Africa's growth is due to internal consumption. Some of the mechanisms that are required for that internal consumption to be consolidated are now in place. Some of the shocks that we received with commodity prices, oil, etc., are actually going to be good investments for the future because it obliged some subsidies to go, it obliged countries to take care of their deficits, it tightened a bit the structures of economic governance. So I'm very confident that this year is going to be a better year than last year.
Mr. Mwencha, what's the African Union going to be focusing on?
I think let me go micro here to say that institutional leadership is also important, and that the African Union will be looking at how we can structure ourselves to support member states in implementation of Agenda 2063, but also to create an enabling environment for us to deliver this mechanism in an efficient and effective manner.
All right, Mr. Erastus Mwencha, Dr. Carlos Lopez, and Ambassador Kwang Weilin. Gentlemen, thank you very much for being on Talk Africa. And that's all we have time for this week from the African Union headquarters in Addis Ababa. Do join us again next week for more on Talk Africa. Goodbye.